Hi everybody, my name is Shiza, and in this video, I'll be analyzing the research paper Recent Advances of Machine Vision Technology in Fish Classification. So this is a bit unique compared to my past videos because most of my past videos have been on biomedical imaging. And the reason why I did this one is because I've been working on a research project with a couple of people, and we were looking at some of the big neglected problems in our world. And I came across so many problems, including one specifically nutrient pollution. And long story short, nutrient pollution is one of the biggest root causes of declining marine population. And so many people rely on the fish population, especially to sustain themselves and their families. And the fact that the marine population is declining is something that we need to act upon. And so for me, since I love computer vision, I obviously wanted to look more into how that could play a role into this space. And so I found this research paper. So over here, the reason why they're using automatic classification is because they want to comprehend the marine ecology, the fish behaviors, they want to manage the aquaculture, and they want to monitor the fish health. Because as I said, there's so many reasons why fish populations are declining, and just knowing all of these, especially by using automatic classification, is something that can be really beneficial. And the reason why they want to specifically make it automated is because there's so many advantages, especially the fact that it's fast and it's non-destructive to the environment. Also, because of the fact that machine vision, which is what they call this, all these models, all these algorithms have been advancing more and more in the deep learning space and in the machine learning space, all of these, they want to capitalize on that to solve this problem. So let's start off with the introduction. This is the opportunity here. The world population is growing, and it'll make the fisheries industry face a continuous increase in pressure. That's why the quality and the yield of the aquaculture is very important. Now, to do this, we want to have smart aquaculture. And to increase aquaculture production, automatic fish classification is one of the important aspects that we can use. Now, classification specifically is needed because there's more than 33,000 species of fish in the world, and there's like just a diverse amount. So that's why by classifying these fish, you can better understand marine ecology and the fish behavior and the different species. You can investigate the endangered species, the populations. You can, again, manage aquaculture. You can monitor the fish community status and their health. You can quality test on different fish. You can do studies of aquatic ecology. The list just goes on and on. And that's why we want to use fish classification in this research paper. So over here, as it says, the problem with the status quo is that fish classification's labor intensive. First of all, it's also very time consuming and it's destructive because if you're physically collecting the fish samples by the divers who are going into the ocean, obviously that's destructive to the environment. That's why marine biologists want to use better technology and to mitigate this problem, better technology that's more efficient, that's automated, that's non-invasive, and that's non-destructive for fish sampling and classification to avoid the problems caused by traditional manual methods. And they want to do this by using a certain technology called machine vision. Now, this part really confused me because I was like, who calls this machine vision? Is it not computer vision? Now, fun fact is, machine vision and computer vision are actually two different things. Computer vision systems, they usually extract as much information as they can about an object or a scene. But for machine vision, it basically zeroes in on the most critical parts of the image and relative to its application. So like if it's segmentation, then it specifically focuses on that one thing and then it analyzes. So there's a difference between both of them, but they're both important branches of artificial intelligence and they're both correlated to each other. Obviously, along with machine vision, computer vision can also replace the eye and the brain to have fast, automatic, and non-invasive detection. And applications of this in the fish classification case would be analyzing fish behavior, calculating the weight, measuring the length, identifying species. And I actually had a call with somebody today who was talking about how they're using computer vision to detect how many fish are in the ocean. And they're using these sort of waves so that if they find some sort of disruption, they know that they should stop the video at that stage and count it. It's basically this very this very specific system that they use, and I just found that really interesting. That was a really good call. Also, along with that, they as shown in figure 1 over here, there's three main ways that machine vision models can be used: image acquisition, image processing, and classification methods. And so that's what we'll be diving into for this research paper. Over here, as it says, section 2 will describe fish image acquisition. Section 3 will explore the pre-processing techniques used for fish classification. Section 4 will talk about the different fish classification methods and the application, so more about the models. And Section 5 will discuss the existing challenges and the future research directions. And then Section 6 concludes the paper. So before we get into these sections, one thing that I do want to point out is a lot of this stuff in this research paper was kind of self-explanatory. Like if you're someone who knows a lot about computer vision in terms of like loss functions, different convolutional neural networks, all of this is actually going to be pretty familiar. So for me, the thing that was eye-opening wasn't the methods and the wasn't the methods, it was the applications. It was how are they using computer vision in this case? How much insight can computer vision give in the fish industry? That's was my intention, at least for this research paper, because as I read more and more of it, I realized that these methods of the ResNet, the support vector machine, the KNN, all of that, like I already knew from before. So for me, at least, this was more about the methods, more about the applications, not the methods. And so I'll be focusing more on that here as well. So, for image acquisition, to achieve accurate fish classification, you need very high quality images that are shown in complex environments. Now, because of this, we're very dependent on the quality of the acquired fish so that you could have a very good performance of the fish classification system. However, the problem with this with current systems is that water turbidity, which is basically the fact that water might not be clear, it might be mucky, it might be dirty, it might be dissolved in different particles, making it cloudy, all of that. Because of that, the quality of the images might actually be really bad. And that's a big problem with what's happening in image acquisition. And that's why there's a lot of methods being done. And again, as I said, like I don't want to focus too much on the methods, and that's really what I'm not going to be doing. But here, this is talking about different researchers and the different methods that they acquired the images at. But this is more of why they actually need it. So the thing is, the quality and the detail of the images that they captured, they're heavily dependent on the equipment that and the techniques that are used, right? And because of the fact that we have deep learning neural networks, you can't have small data sets because you need accurate models, you need more data to train the classification model. And that's why many researchers have been using open source data sets. And over here, it shows a bunch of data sets. It shows Fish for Knowledge, Deep and Dash, uh, basically a lot of data sets. And then they talk more and more about data sets. Now, in a data set, as they're saying, that images with annotations are so important because you need to evaluate the model performance, right? But in the images, there is a problem because the images that are acquired, even after they're acquired, there's like the pre-processing thing, and we'll talk about that too in the next section here. Image pre-processing, the fact that some of the data has shadows, background, and noise. So because of that, researchers want to pre-process these images before they're actually fed into the deep learning model. And if you know about computer vision, you know that's what happens as well. We pre-process the images and then we put them into the model, then we train, validate, test, and then we get the result. So that's what they're doing here too. Now, along with that, again, this is also similar to computer vision, so I won't touch on it too much, but we're also using data augmentation techniques, which is basically modifying an image and then we're adding it to the data set. So you're not having duplicates, you're having modifications just so you can increase the size of the data set, making the model more accurate. And because of that, we're also preventing overfitting. And they also talked about data augmentation techniques such as transposing, panning, rotating, a bunch of other things that we'll also be looking into. Then for image pre-processing, this is the next section. So obviously, as I mentioned, this is such a big part of the fish classification steps because there's obviously a lot of blurs, noise, shadow, all of that is a very big problem. And that's why, because because of those complex backgrounds and noise, we want to use image grayscale, image denoising, image segmentation, image enhancement, and image augmentation. So we'll be looking shortly into all of those. So first of all, image grayscale. Now, for image grayscale, this is also very familiar. You should probably be very familiar with this if you know about computer vision and pre-processing. Image grayscale is probably the easiest one. Basically, in an image, you have three channels. You have R, you have G, and you have B. So instead of having three channels, those RGB, now you're having one channel, and one channel that's grayscale. So it's kind of like black and white image instead of a colored image. And that helps to reduce the computations and helps alleviate overfitting as well. So that's image grayscale. For image denoising, what we're doing here is we're using this thing called a Gaussian filter. And we'll be looking into how this works. So first of all, this is the mean and the median filter. So this is the median filter, right? If you have this is the mean, you find the mean of this, and you have some sort of kernel or filter that's going through the entire image with a certain stride, which is like if it goes here, if the stride is 2, then you do 1, 2, and then it would be 3 here, and then from here you would 1, 2, and then the box would be here. So that's like kind of stride. So usually, let's say you have a filter that's 3 by 3 over here. You have this filter, or you could call it a kernel as well, and inside you have these pixel values. So what you're doing for the mean filtering is that you look at all the values inside, you find the mean, or you can do average as well, which is mean and median. So for median, you find the middle. For average, you find the average, the mean, and then you take all of these values and you assign it to the median if you're doing median filtering, or if you're doing average filtering, then all of these values would be 19. So that's basically how mean and median filtering work. Now there's also Gaussian filter, which I'll talk about. So here, let's say we have a Gaussian filter which looks like this. This is basically what it looks like, but you have different sizes. And over here, as this video talks about, this middle part, it has a very high intensity. That's why it's like very high over here. And then at the bottom, this is where you have the very low intensity, this black part over here. So if what you're doing is, if you're taking this filter over here and you're applying it to this original image, this is what the image looks like. The reason why it looks like that is because over here, since we have the very low intensities, a lot of the image is going to be blurred. But at the same time, because of this high intensity, you can see that some of the edges are actually pretty sharp. And that's what Gaussian filter basically is. And then we also go into image enhancement. And image enhancement is aiming to enhance image features by enhancing the global or the local useful information in the image. And that would increase the accuracy of object detection. And so they talk about specific methods for that as well. And again, the intention behind this is because of the poor visibility, right? It's very challenging because of the complexity of the underwater environment, and because of that, we want to enhance the image. And there's many ways you could do this, such as looking at the histogram of the original image, and then histogram, which contains like different pixel values, and then you're essentially like leveling them together. I don't think I have a visual for that, but you can think of it like this: like some parts of the image or some of the pixels might be very dark, some of them might be very bright. So we're just like leveling that up. And that can also significantly improve the visibility of the underwater images because we're enhancing contrast while also reducing noise. Then we go into image segmentation. And here it says one method to do this is edge segmentation, which is commonly used for this, but at the same time, you can also use different models such as UNet. UNet's a very common one for segmentation as well. But what they're doing is they're another algorithm that GrabCut, I believe his name is, this algorithm, the GrabCut algorithm. So the researchers use this GrabCut algorithm to segment fish bodies from the image background, and then they combined the operation so that they wouldn't get the unwanted shapes in the image. right? And then they would focus on that key thing, and then they would process that. So you could also do that with the segmentation so that you don't have any background noise and you're just focusing on the fish. And from the fish, then you can find, okay, let's classify this. Okay, what is the health of this fish? Many other things like that. We also have image augmentation, which is also known as data augmentation. And again, this is modifying the images and then adding it to the data set. And these are some of the methods that they use. I'll just name them out: mirror transformation, cropping, panning, brightness modification, clipping, noise addition, rotation, scaling, and color transformation. And because of that, you increase the size of the data set, which is necessary again to alleviate the overfitting, and increasing the accuracy as well. And then we move on to classification. So, obviously, as we said, classifying fish is essential to accurately quantify the behavior of different fish. And so, classification methods that are talked about are, first of all, traditional machine learning and deep learning. So, again, these are methods, not necessarily applications. So, I'm just going to be skimming through this. So for traditional machine learning, the three main things that they focus on here are texture features, shape features, and color features, because these are the three most important features for visual recognition. And so combining them all together, you would get better classification results for this scenario. So we talk about these ones. Feature extraction. So for feature extraction, this is where we talk about those three things: those texture, shape, and color features. Feature extraction is basically like you have certain characteristics or features of an object, or you could call it an image in this case. And it could be, the features can literally just be like edges, they could be corners, stuff like that. You just have those features. And the way a CNN works, if you don't know, it's basically doing more and more feature extraction so you can get more insight to the point that at the end of the convolutional neural network you know what the image is. So that's feature extraction. And we start off here with the color feature, and this is obviously a global feature because all of the images have a color, unless you're making them grayscale, which is also something that you could do, but it still has color regardless. So color features are relatively easy to extract because if you convert the RGB color values into HSV, which is hue saturation value, basically an alternative to RGB, you could have higher accuracy classification because you can easily tell between where or what pixel values indicate what. So that is the color feature. Then we also talk about the um, the fact that the challenge here is the extraction of color features, though, is very challenging in a real underwater environment. That's why researchers are doing it in a controlled environment just to like test this out right now. But as the technology gets more advanced, as the computer vision models show more and more accuracy, obviously, like they'll adapt to using different types of machine learning models in the water. So yeah, um, they did talk about like how they were using a control experiment. I'm not sure if they're using that here too. I'm sure that they've probably tested it out underwater, but they're also doing the control experiment as well. Now, here, what it's talking about, the challenging part with color features, to touch upon again, is you can't just have color features and that's it. You need to use color features, but also other features. And there's also the texture feature, which is also global, and it has a high resistance to noise. So, what happens in classification models is that you use a combination of texture features and color features, and that's widely used. And then they also did talk more about like what the problem within that is, because if the resolution of the images change through the convolutional neural network, the texture features, they have very large deviations, and the texture reflected from the 2D fish images might not be the same as the real surface texture because there might be the refraction of the light, and um, the variation of the illumination in water and the loss of contrast, all of that might not really help. So that's why we can also use another feature for the shape. And some researchers, what they did is that they extracted simple and intuitive shape features on the fish body, such as the fish height, the fish length. They also looked at centroid contour distance. It's like if you have some sort of centroid in the middle, like what is the shape of the outside part of it that's closer to the centroid, stuff like that. They used all of these to overcome the complexity of the underwater environment, especially with the edge contours. Then they start talking about different methods for feature extraction, such as scale invariant feature transform, histogram of oriented gradients, which is my personal favorite because I also did talk about it in my previous research paper. Check that out, research paper video, if you haven't checked that out already. Weber's local descriptor, and I think that was pretty much it for feature extraction. So now on to classification. Classification is basically the final step, and this is talking about different machine learning algorithms that are used. So we'll be talking about ANNs, k-nearest neighbors, SVMs, random forests, native Bayes, and Adaboost. So I don't want to touch upon this too much because, as I mentioned, like all of these methods are pretty simple to understand, but I'll probably briefly touch upon them. So for ANN, this is basically what an ANN looks like, an artificial neural network, and it has a certain amount of neurons that are connected with weights, and then you also have a bias, but again, a bias is not shown here, not need to worry about that too much. So we go forward, and then we also do the back propagation to optimize the network, and an ANN can capture the relationship between the multiple input features that you have here, and it has a very powerful um, noise resistance, so it's very good in that sense. That's ANN. We also have KNN, and that's K nearest neighbor. So this is actually my article, and I have a whole machine learning article based on these algorithms. So feel free to check that out as well. So for KNN, what is happening is, let's say you want to classify a known input, right? So you have, for example, you have um, I can't think of fish types, but let's say you had like a salmon, and I guess that's pretty common. But let's say you had a certain fish type, and that was this dot right here. Depending on the clusters you have, so let's say one fish type is A, one fish type is B, and then you're looking to see which fish type this part is in. You basically use this k nearest neighbor, and then you use like mathematical formulas like the Euclidean distance to find the closest k points to the data point, and then you find like the majority of the classes in that area, and then you make a, like the algorithm makes a bunch of assumptions based on that. Along with that, we are also using a support vector machine, and in a support vector machine, this is basically using a hyperplane so that once you have the classes, you can separate it. Let's say you have two classes, you can separate it within. This is a linear one, this is a non-linear one. But let's say you have a let's say you have a linear one over here. Um, here Over here, this is the non-linear one. You would separate it using a straight line. But if you have a linear one, then you have a hyperplane that can just go straight through the middle like this, like just one straight line. So you don't need it to be like a curve shape. So it doesn't matter which one it is, but whatever it is trying to separate the information so that once you have the hyperplane, it'll be easier to classify where does this class go? Does it go with class A? Does it go with class A? Where does this image belong? How should we classify it? So that's basically the SVM for you. We also talked about random forests. I also did talk about that here. Random forests here. I don't think this one is that important compared to the other ones. Although it did pretty well, but I mean the other ones did better. There's also the native Bayes. Let's search that one. Don't know if I did. Hmm. There we go. So they call it that too. There we go. So this uses a probabilistic approach to solve problems. So we have a predictor variable in the algorithm, and it's basically independent of each other. So this is a very good example. If you're trying to identify a fruit, you could have the predictor variables of the shape, color, and taste. So let's say you have an input that's orange in color, it's sphere, it's tangy. All of that would basically show that it's an orange. So these variables rely on each other to get the correct fruit output. So that's basically how it works. And that is for the Bayesian algorithms. We also have Adaboost, and this one I've actually never heard of. So Adaboost, we have an image of here too. It's basically a series of weak classifiers being put into the image just to see what they classify, and then we add all of that up with weights based on how accurate it was to get the final classifier. So weak classifiers, putting them together, strong classifier. That's basically how the algorithm for Adaboost works. Then we look into deep learning, and this part I'm gonna be skipping a lot of because all of these models use convolutional neural networks. They're just different architectures. So here, um, this so in fish applications, deep learning has shown excellent performance in live fish identification, fish classification, behavioral analysis, feeding analysis, biomass estimation, size, weight classifications, a bunch of things. That's why I love computer vision. Um, but it does talk about an architecture called AlexNet. It talks about another architecture which is VGGNet, and that should be here. See, this is, for example, a flowchart of a deep learning technique. This is basically a neural network architecture, followed by a fully connected layers. So we use VGGNet. There's Google Net. What else is there? What else did they talk about? They looked into ResNet. They also looked into RCNN, faster RCNN, YOLO, object detection, ResNet. That's pretty much most of the models that they looked at. So even though, despite this, the pre-trained model sometimes has a lot more parameters and less model flexibility. So this is specifically addressing the deep learning neural networks, right? So because they have, again, they have a lot more parameters, they don't have that much flexibility. Because of that, it has a very large computational effect. And they talk about this in the conclusion as well, where they don't have enough GPU, they don't have enough CPU for this. And that's why a lot of these are big problems that they hope to mitigate in the future. They talked about how the complexity of the underwater environment leads to the fact that images have uncontrollable factors such as light variability, water turbidity, um, low contrast and visibility, and high noise. And despite that, there's also unpredictable behaviors, because although you can mitigate the uncontrollable ones by using pre-processing techniques, you can't really do anything about the unpredictable behaviors such as the biting, the collision among the live fish. That's why we want to make sure that it's not destructive to the environment. We want to make sure it's safe for them. We want to make sure that we don't have those unpredictable behaviors as well. What else did we talk about? This was for the next steps over here. In the future, researchers, they want to use, this is obviously true because, as I mentioned, we want to have very large data sets. So in the future, researchers must count on public open source data sets with more fish species, higher image quality, because you need to have a valid evaluation criteria of fish classification models. If we have more than 33,000 fish species, obviously you need to include all of that to make sure that you're actually, if you're implementing this into an ocean, you can scale it up to different fish species. We also talked about the summary over here. This is talking about how we can use methods based on traditional machine learning to have a good classification accuracy. We can also use deep learning techniques like CNNs and different architectures within that. But all in all types of data models and classifiers, as well as manual features, can be combined to improve the overall results. And then it starts talking about what I just said. The CPUs, the GPUs, all of that is needed so that you can make sure that it's not computationally expensive. And yet, because if you have because you have more than 33,000 fish species, obviously this is going to be a problem in the future as well. And so the conclusion, current deep learning techniques, they're actually kind of far from the ideal level of AI. We're kind of still in the weak AI stage because of the limitations that this research paper proposed as well, including the CPUs, the GPUs, all of that being limited. And so we have deficiencies such as the huge data requirement that we need for the 33,000 fish species, the huge computation, the complex network design. And even then, even if we use transfer learning techniques, there's still a large amount of labeled data that is needed. And that's why we have this bottleneck that hopefully in further application and advancements in deep learning we'll be able to solve in order to save the fish.